Spotify advertises that it is the largest driver of revenue to the music industry. So you have paid out $16.5 billion to the music industry since launch. But that, of course, is a double-edged sword because it means 70% of what you bring in is going out the door right away. And even though you've shown consistent and solid growth since going public, Wall Street has been a little mixed. And the critics say that the business model is, the margins are too low. Can you reduce the share of what you have to pay to music companies long term? And what do you see as your path to stronger profits?
Yeah, sure. So I think the most important thing is we tend to look at things as zero sum games. And that's just not my approach to a lot of these problems. So when you look at the music industry, I think it's very important that many people make this distinction between the labels against Spotify. But that's not how I look at it. There's still a lot of inefficiencies in the business for everyone. So if you just take it through from an artist vantage point, an artist now creates a piece of music. It used to be that one of the most expensive things was around distributing that music, pressing the CDs, getting it out to the retailers, making it heard. And that was a huge part of the risk that the record company used to take. Nowadays, one of the biggest risks is in marketing that record because it's harder and harder to get heard in the world. And labels are spending a lot of money promoting music and getting it out there in the world. And that's something, as an example, that I think we can make a huge difference in just making that whole process a lot more efficient. And in doing so, we can make it so that this becomes a better enterprise for labels, but we can also, of course, make it a very lucrative business opportunity for us to pursue that.
Now, a lot has been made of Spotify's relationship with the music industry, and the stories that exploded are, Taylor Swift pulling her music off Spotify. Of course, it's back on there. Or Beyonce putting her album exclusively on a competing service. How would you describe your relationship with the music industry today? Is it better or worse than it was, and why?
Well, I think it's just night and day compared to when we started. Just 10 years ago, much of what I spent every single day about was just educating people about what streaming was, and the largest point was just the lack of imagining that this could be the future. So a lot of the things we were dealing with was, why would I want to do this? I want to own my music. This feeling of needing to own my music was the prevalent feeling. So no one even thought streaming could be a major source of revenue, let alone the biggest source of revenue. And so a lot of that was just educating the whole industry about that shift. Obviously, now we live in a world where streaming is not only, the largest revenue source for the music industry, but is now over half of all the revenue for the entire music industry. And so people aren't talking about that. Now people are talking instead about, okay, well, what does that mean? And when have we reached saturation of the music industry? And what will the whole industry look like? And how many will it support once we're at that stage? So it's a very different discussion than what we had 10 years ago. And a lot of the things you referenced were in that build-up phase when people were unsure whether streaming was something that was net positive for the industry. And I think people realized that streaming is here to stay. It is the a significant driver to the music industry, and the industry itself has been growing because of streaming.
You're also working on this long-term bet, which is your two-sided marketplace and allowing artists to pay to promote their music on the platform. How much do artists spend promoting new releases on Spotify? I know The Weeknd just paid to have his album promoted on Spotify, and how
Right.
much revenue do you think that can drive?
Well, over time, we think it's a significant revenue opportunity for Spotify and for the music industry. And when you think about it right now, as I mentioned, a huge barrier for a lot of artists today is just the ability for them to market their music in an efficient way. And so either you have to be signed to a major label and you have to be on that level where someone at that company trusts that this will be a big thing and they're going to bet the farm on making that happen. But it's getting harder and harder to do that. And we want to democratize the process so that everyone can do it, and that there's a lot more efficient ways where you can measure the ROI of that spend in a bigger way. Today we're early in that journey. We've been talking about it for quite some time now, but we're still very, very early in that journey. But over time, we think this will be a major driver of our business and the increase in our future profitability.
So, about 60 million people in the US pay for a streaming service. How big do you think that number can get? And what do you think Spotify's share will be?
Well, globally, we talk about the fact that we think this is an opportunity in the billions. Again, we don't put a ton of emphasis on how people are paying, whether they're paying through being on the ad funded environment or the subscription funded. And let me just put a perspective on that. So it's obvious today that the music industry focuses on paid subscription. But when I look at even all of the paid subscriptions combined today, I think IFPI has that number at, call it $12 billion or something equivalent. And then you look at radio, and in the US, the US radio industry, I believe this is probably 2017 or 2018 numbers, so it's a little bit outdated, but the entire US radio industry on just the ad side was $18 billion. So that's larger than the entire streaming industry is for the music industry. So in the future, I think the right metric to focus on isn't just the number of paid subscribers, but it's how many people do we have in um, in a legal environment where it's being monetized for the music industry. And I think the combination of ad supported and subscription and probably a la carte models as well. It's those three things that will drive the future of the music industry.
The US and Europe still make up close to 70% of Spotify subscribers, but that share is declining as you grow internationally. How do you see the mix shifting, and what's the most important market for you, let's say in the next year?
Well, the fastest growing and of the largest size is LATAM right now for us. So we're very, very excited about all the progress we're making in LATAM. It's super fun to see just how people are engaging with it, how crazy they are, the Brazilians, the Mexicans, and everyone about music in general and Spotify in particular. So that's fun, but it's also a lot of fun because we can see things like reggaeton, which used to be a local occurrence, now being a global phenomenon as well. And it's fun to see how Latin artists now are crossing over to becoming global artists in a big way. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's due to how much streaming has been growing in LATAM. And we're, of course, investing very heavily in that trend, and we're very excited about it.
You're not in Korea yet, which is one of the biggest music markets, and there are a lot of local competitors. I'm sure you can still get a healthy dose of K-pop on Spotify, but when will we see you there?
Well, it's one of the markets that we have as a priority market, so hopefully we can launch there soon. As you mentioned, it's one of the biggest music markets in the world, but it's also a very vibrant community. You have BTS, of course, being a worldwide phenomenon now, but we're very excited about the opportunity, and hopefully, once COVID sort of clears up, you'll see us launching there.
The cost of Spotify is much lower in other countries like India, like Latin America, and the music companies are concerned about devaluing the cost of music. Do you see an opportunity to increase the cost of Spotify in some of the more mature markets like the United States, like we've seen Netflix do?
I think definitely long term there's that opportunity for us. I think in the near term though, it's really all about focusing for growth for us. We talked a little bit about opportunity before, but I can't imagine uh, you know this not being a billion user opportunity around the world. And we talked about the US specifically. If you think about all the people who are consuming radio in the US today, it's well north of 80% of the population that are doing that. All of those are moving over online, and that's the opportunity that we're going after. And we still think it's the early days of that. And once you're hitting more of a maturity where it's hard to grow, I think then is where you're looking at price increases. We're just not there yet. Even in what you would call some of the mature markets, we still think that we're still relatively early in that cycle of growth.